Welcome, everybody. Greetings from the county line. We're, as you can see, and if you've been following us this month, you know we're not on the county line. I've come into town looking for some really smart, articulate, successful people who can share their philosophies with us and tell us how they became so popular and famous. So I'm here with Kelly, the blonde, and Jamie, the Irish actress-looking woman, who have families and faith, and they've never been divorced. They don't have any tattoos. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they've been telling us the last couple of weeks about their philosophy as to how to keep their family strong, and how they got there to believe that. Now, we were talking over the break about some of the things that parents seem to be concerned about today, rightfully so. Things like social media.
Yep. And
you both talked about how you're addressing that. Bullying, teen sex, helicopter parents, gender reassignment and homosexuality, teen suicide, substance abuse, and certainly concerns about school violence. I know your kids have been touched by these things.
I don't know how they can probably exist and not
have been, yeah.
So, and that's why it's always just going to be having an open conversation with them about things. And we've always talked about things in our family.
Well, so many parents think they have an open relationship with their kids, but do they really?
Sure, I mean, we don't know half the stuff that goes on, but I feel like, in all honesty, I mean, we'd be ignorant to think that we...
You'd be naive to think that you do.
Yeah, we'd be ignorant to think that we do. But we know when our child is sad, or when he's happy, or when they... we've spent enough time with them that we can read when there's a change. And so if there's the change, that's when you have to take time to, go in and find out, or, that sort of stuff. We can read them, I think. I think parents can kind of read their kid. And
Yeah, no question about that. But then, so you read them,
yeah,
and you detect that there may be some interference in their happiness with some of these issues that are so prevalent in society. How do you address that? I mean, what's the rescue? Where's the lifeline?
So, I mean, I would, the one thing that Evan would tell you, and so would Gavin, even if you brought him out here, is I never actually believe them. When a story gets told, and it's not because they've lied, it's because they have to prove to me that what they're saying is the truth. So if I get a phone call that says, Evan did X, Y, and Z, I'm going to believe the person that called me until Evan can prove to me that that wasn't done. I think a lot of times parents take the side of their kids immediately, and that's where a lot of problems ensue.
Your boys don't lie to you that much, though. Surely not.
Well, maybe partly because they know I won't believe them until they can prove that. And that's happened. I mean, we've had to have, Evan, I'm sorry, I don't believe you. You're going to have to prove to me that this actually didn't happen. And so it's like, who can we call that can vouch for you? And then we get on the phone and we call that person and say, this is the story that we have. What can you tell me about what happened?
That is old school parenting. The old story about if you get spanked in school, you're going to get it twice.
And so Evan now knows, right? Mom's not going to believe me. So either I tell the truth or she's going to find out. Most likely. I mean, I'm not saying that I haven't been bamboozled, but for the most part, I just don't trust them.
But you both made the point in a previous podcast that parenting might be a little easier for you because you've instilled the faith in Jesus Christ for your kids from the very start, and that maybe they're able to ignore some of these pressures and some of these pleasures because their priorities are in a different place.
Yeah, I mean, I think also not only is it us, right, but they also have a healthy fear of God, right? And that's not like a fear like I'm afraid of him type thing. It's a fear of disappointment. That's what fear of God means. So that, they know that if they do some of this, they might disappoint us, but they also know that they're disappointing somebody else. And that's heavy. So that makes you not want to do it, right? If you know that.
Teach them to love Christ, and then they don't want to disappoint God.
Ideally. Right. I mean, we all sin. We
Right.
all do it. But that hopefully is going through their brain as they're looking to bully somebody. Is
Yeah.
this really loving this child if I'm, throwing his books on the floor or calling him names or whatever that
You've got a
XYZ.
teenage son, and you've raised a couple of boys, right?
And M, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, adolescence and those teenage years, don't those guys question you about the validity and the credibility of a creator, a superior being, a God? Do they ever just say, I'm not even believing that stuff?
I think like last podcast or whatever, I mentioned that Evan will ask me, there's all these religions. How do you know that this is
Yeah.
the one? But I've never actually had the question of the creator. Like I don't know. They've never asked that question.
I haven't been asked that either. So,
That's a
Yeah.
stumbling block, though, for a lot of people. Not just, maybe because your kids were oriented toward it from the very start, but there's a lot of people out there who just don't buy into the whole concept. It's
Sure. I have a friend that's an atheist, and we've had conversations. I don't understand. It's difficult for me to have that because how do you look at all this? I don't know. It's hard for me to understand.
is that your proof of the truth?
Well,
That it's a beautiful day and you've been blessed in so many ways. And
well, if there's not a creator, I don't know, where it all comes from.
yeah.
So
Does-
that part just doesn't.
Well,
I can't
what
get
about-
quite past that.
What
for me.
about the Big Bang theory?
Well, that was actually a Catholic priest that came up with that.
Tell me about that.
Well, I can't really speak
No,
intelligently
I know.
about it. That's about all I can tell you is that. Look it up.
that's right.
Do
There
your
you go.
research.
that is true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
was.
it's definitely, that part's true. I can't speak further into it, but.
Yeah, that is true. He did come up with that. So that theory really doesn't contradict.
No,
the
you'll find
idea
that
of
science
a
doesn't
creator.
contradict faith.
I talked to our priest, Father Shockley, about this in a previous podcast. A lot of people, when they pick up the Bible, they make the mistake of opening it up to the first chapter because, it's the beginning. In the beginning. You want to start at the beginning of the story. And it's just so darn confusing, and you wonder what those stories are supposed to mean, and how can they even be real, with talking snakes and a guy and his son building a boat big enough to hold every animal in the world and all that. How do you get past all that? How do you get past the fact that just seems like an Aesop's fable?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think that's one of the beauties for me as growing up as a cradle Catholic was, the Old Testament to me wasn't really where we started. For me, it was all New Testament stuff. It was all Jesus Christ, that sort of stuff. To be honest with you, it's probably been in the last 3 or 4 years with that book study that I did, The Jewish Roots of the Eucharist, and going to RCIA, that the Old Testament has opened up for me. So, in realizing that all of the Old Testament is just a typology for the coming of Christ. So, I think it would be difficult. I do think that would be difficult to just open up the Old Testament and start reading it without knowing Christ first.
That's where you should start then.
Well, I don't know. I'm no expert. But for me, I see where that would be like a...
I think that a lot of people start with the New Testament, and that's part of their journey is starting there. So, in other Christian denominations, and I think that is the focus. They don't see, the Old Testament as it's revealed in the New Testament as clearly until you kind of go through and you learn about it.
Do those? I know a good portion of the Old Testament is history based. It's a history of the
There is history.
early world as we know it. But don't some of those stories steal from the credibility of the whole thing when you think about some of the fantastic things that are reported in there?
Okay, so by fantastic, that's where, we believe that there's transubstantiation, that the host, by the power of the priest and the Holy Spirit, becomes the body and blood and soul and divinity of Jesus Christ. If that can happen, a boat can save the world. It's like...
Right.
I knew this
And
would
if you have
happen.
Jesus Christ who raises
I knew we would
from
never.
the dead and ascends into heaven and can do that after what he suffered and went through, then I'm pretty sure you can build a boat.
It all becomes...
And it's faith. We have to have
right,
faith.
it all becomes, yeah.
Faith.
You have to have some
okay,
faith.
so that's a great. You've just opened the door to
segue into-
something I hadn't even intended to talk about.
And that's where, as a mom and a wife, my faith that I've had my whole life, it only grows stronger. My love for Christ, everything grows stronger in all the things, in the ways that you see him around the world and your day to day.
What's that all? I mean, I find that we're starting to see more young people, I think, come back to church for some reason.
For some reason.
I know,
Because they're searching.
Exactly. It's not for
They're
some
not,
random reason.
Yeah. And people, I think, when they go through something really difficult, they come back. I mean, a lot of times it's the hardships that enter into our lives that sometimes draw us closer.
Yeah, sadly. Or maybe not. Maybe
Yeah,
that is a good thing.
for sure.
But, this whole discussion, you brought up the Eucharist. And, gosh, when was it? July, right? When they had this Eucharistic conference.
Oh, yes, we were both there.
I'm sure you were. Gosh, it was reported this thing is bigger than a Donald Trump rally.
It was huge. I've never been to anything like it.
But, I was amazed that the Indianapolis media, they have a bit, when Taylor Swift comes to town, it gets more play than tens of thousands of Catholics swarm the streets of downtown Indianapolis to...
It was like 75,000 or 80,000 people.
Yeah, it was.
make a big deal out of a vanilla wafer, right?
It's not vanilla wafer.
Well, tell me about it.
I don't know what you mean. About the Congress or?
No, the conference
Oh.
was based on, because I think the Catholic Church did a study
Yes.
that determined an alarming number of Catholics did not believe
Believe.
that Christ was present in the Eucharist.
Correct.
Which is the communion wafer, for lack of, so that all the Protestants and Christians out there can understand it, Jews, anybody else that might be watching, that we take during communion is actually, as Jesus suggested, his body.
Blood, soul, and divinity.
I mean,
Maybe
that
he
is
didn't just suggest. He said.
No, you're right. Forgive me. I'm in big
I think the
trouble.
bigger question is try to prove it's not.
That's a good question.
And that's the question I think everybody should ask. Prove that it's not. See where it gets you. And that's the whole, that's kind of what
whole
we talked
research
about,
and-
is you need to figure this out for yourself. But if you're not asking the questions, then you're not going to get the answers.
Right. Okay.
And I'm sure everybody's heard this before, but as C.S. Lewis calls it, he says either Christ is who he says he is, he's a lunatic, or he's a liar. So, and you have to come to that conclusion. He's either God, because he says he's God, or he's crazy, or he's lying. So if you can, when you do your research and you go in it with that mindset, you will come out to find out that he is who he says he is. Again, like we said in another episode, he's the truth. And if the truth doesn't speak truly, then nothing's true. And he says in the Bible, in John chapter 6, eat my blood, or eat my bread, eat my body, drink my blood, and you'll have life everlasting.
So that's the
As a
basis of all
synopsis.
that. But if I wanted to be skeptical about it, I'd have to wonder, do we even know that Jesus said those things? How do we know that?
Well, you read it in John chapter 6. He says it.
Well, here's a bunch of 11, 12 guys that got together and they had had a band and they wanted to be famous. And
Then why did so many people leave? If what they were hearing was just fake, then why would they have left? I think it was that real.
who left?
So when
He says this,
when he says this,
the disciples that were following him,
they continue to follow him. But lots of people left.
Because it's hard, right? I mean, it's
who
hard
wants,
for
like,
anybody
you're
listening.
eating the body of a person, so
Yeah, it's a horrific
So he
idea.
leaves,
Right.
right? And so then he turns to his apostles, who are the 12 that have been following them the whole time, and he says, well, what do you say? Are you going to stay or are you going to go? He puts it down because he's willing to leave, he's willing to let them go too if they don't believe it. And Peter says, we believe that what you say.
whom should we go?
Yeah.
Like, where are they going to go?
So we don't understand this, but we believe what you say. We've watched you. We've seen what you've done. We believe that what you're saying is true.
Yeah, it's still a big leap, though. I like your idea, your suggestion. You prove that it's not the body of Christ because he said, and it's been well documented, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think how many of the apostles? The Gospels were all written within how many years of Jesus' death?
Oh gosh, that's not a question for me, but I think within 70 years.
That sounds right.
I know. I don't know exactly either.
You couldn't quote me on that.
So
but.
there were, as the Gospels were being published and made public, which this was the story of Jesus' life, the miracles he performed, his crucifixion, his rising from the dead, all that stuff, all the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There were still people alive who remembered those events actually happening or not, and no one ever contested it.
That part wasn't contested until the Protestant Revolution.
Yeah.
Nobody
So,
disagreed that it was the
what,
body and blood
500
of
years
Christ
ago?
until 1,500 years ago. It wasn't until the Protestant
What
Revolution.
was the basis for the objection? Do you remember? It doesn't
you?
matter.
Do you
no,
remember?
I don't
yeah,
remember.
I don't know.
I don't remember. The signal. So anyway.
Yeah, so anyway.
80,000 people approximately get together and to celebrate the Eucharist and
Yes.
make sure that the world knows that it's important. Why?
Because it's that important. And that's what was so amazing about being there and seeing everybody there is that we all believe. I mean,
Right.
Well, I'm not going to get into this. I need to make a note to myself so I don't forget. But that's, we all believe 80,000 people showed up, yet I just read something that said the Catholic faithful are pretty much divided on the election this year.
is it half?
Not exactly, but it pretty much corresponds with the
Yeah.
national polls.
So I don't know the
if
exact.
you can believe any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the exact quote, but I think Bishop Barron. it was hit on many, many times. A lot of our speakers. So we had breakout sessions during the day, and then in the evening we'd have these speakers, and they can all pretty much be found online, and all really, really good. But Bishop Barron says it probably the best, and I can't quote him, but he basically says if we as Catholics got together and voted as we should, we could change the world.
How come we can't get together? I mean, if we can agree
Because there's a devil.
that the Eucharist is the body of Christ, yeah, how come we can't agree on the fact that abortion is not a good idea?
It's a great question. I think that's the question we all seek to find. I don't know the answer to that.
Well,
I think...
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Sure.
I think the church has done a damn poor job of making sure people understand what the horror of abortion really is about. I think it started out pretty well.
Yeah.
Because I remember Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
And
I think it's really hard for our priests to give an honest homily on... I shouldn't say honest, that's not what I mean. But to give a homily on this without creating issues.
my gosh,
so to
though,
speak.
it
So,
doesn't
I know
just
that's
have
what
to come from the during Mass in the homily. There's so many ways to get messages out now, ways that I don't even know about. I'm sure your kids probably do, with social media.
Yeah, so I think some of that too has to do with, are you open-minded, right? Are you really looking for the truth, or are you looking for what you think is the truth?
Or something to justify
Is the
the own
church really
choices that
afraid
you've made.
to address some of these
No,
issues?
the church.
No.
If you
Because
look,
they want to stay out of the
no.
controversy.
If you
No.
look, the church is actually very concrete. in What
And
they
it's
say.
never
and it will not
has
change.
changed.
And it has not changed. Ever.
People,
Why aren't there billboards out along the highway?
There
Why don't we
are.
see?
We
I
just
mean,
don't see 'em all.
smoking. My gosh, if you pick up a cigarette in public now, you're going to be vilified. You'll be lucky if somebody doesn't stone you. But by the same token, you can take the Planned Parenthood van and park it in front of the Democratic National Convention
Right?
and start
Give free abortions.
Yes, and that's perfectly fine with everybody.
Well, I don't think that's
I
true.
don't think
not
it's fine
perfectly
with
fine
everybody.
With everybody.
Well, this is a dead-end conversation, apparently.
No, I don't think it's dead end. I mean, honestly, I think it's just, it's like anything else. If you're not going to do your research on what the church actually teaches, you're not going to find your answer. If you're just going based on, what you think or what your neighbor
somebody
says, or what
says
the
that they
news
said.
says, or
yeah.
probably. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, that's a good cue to wrap up this episode here at the golf course. Oh, I just divulged our secret location.
It's probably obvious.
Was.
I don't know, maybe not.
Anyway, thanks for joining us. The ladies are going to have agreed to come back one more time, so we're going to try and cram as much stuff in there as we can to help you in your relationships and your families and whatever else you got going on. Until then, God bless.
Thanks.